of my favorite tombstones. I haven't told this story before, but it's right next to Thomas Lawler, who was very instrumental into setting up the Veterans Memorial Hall. He fought in the Civil War, obviously. He was part of the GAR here, and he was all over in the Veterans Memorial Hall. His name's on the wall, his picture's on the wall, because he was definitely a part of getting that for our veterans. But behind over here is the tombstone of the Rod family, and we're gonna talk a little bit about this young lady whose name is Lucy. And Lucy was kind of a celebrity in Rockford because in the 1800s she went to England with her family to visit some relatives, and she wrote a journal which was later published, and I actually got to read it. They had it at the library. So she wrote them all down, and about her trip over there and the really long boat trip she took. And then she got back, and she passed away she took the trip in 1870, and she passed away in 1873. She was only 17, and her family was a major part of the Centennial Methodist Church, and she actually has a stained glass window in the church that has her name on it. So she was remembered that way. Her father was born in England and migrated in 1832 to Canada and then Rockford, and he owned a grist mill on the Rock River. So he was one of the founding fathers, and he was a definite part of that church. And they had a really big house on Kishwaukee Street for a long time, but they had to tear it down. So I was hoping Sarah would come along tonight to tell us if Lucy might be haunting the area, because the way it works is I do the research and I bring Sarah out and she tells the stories, but I bring new stories in, so she has to tell me if she's haunted, because I'm about as psychic as a brick. But I think that whether she's haunting this place or not, I'd like to tell her story, and I'll let you pass her picture around. Everybody really thought that was cool that she wrote that book at her age. So,
did you say how she died?
She got just influenza. There was a bad bout of scarlet fever that went through Rockford, and diphtheria, and then just the flu about that time period. Okay, so I'm gonna go. I'm trying to decide if we need to go back on the road. The grass is gonna get our shoes really wet really fast.
There's a big pond right in that corner, so
yeah, we won't
just avoid that one.
Probably one of the most elaborate ones here. And the other thing that makes it really unusual is it's kind of metal, not stone. It looks like stone, but it's metal. This was the Schmaus sausage family, and I know it's such a word, hard to say, Schmaus sausage. And they owned a kind of a butcher shop and meat shop right about where Kuma's is now, downtown. Kuma's is. And I'm not sure how this happened, but they built this here, and then they decided they didn't want to be buried here. They wanted to be at Greenwood, where all the other founding fathers were and the fancy things were. So there's nobody here. Just this. None of the schmaus. We're schmausless here. And the one there is very elaborate too. But I just thought that was awful weird. They buried somebody and then they had to move them because they wanted them all together. But yeah. Well, we have lots. And maybe they wanted to be remembered in both places. Okay, how many of you have ever heard of Josiah Goodhue? Great. Okay. Well, Josiah Goodhue is somebody you would probably remember if you ever met him. He was rather eccentric, but he is known probably the best because he changed Rockford's name from Midway to Rockford. He was the one who came up with the name. He was one of our founding fathers. He just decided that we really didn't want to be known as Midway. That makes it sound like we're not really a destination. We're just on the way somewhere else. So he decided to name it Rockford after the rocky ford on the Rock River. So, but unfortunately, when he was alive, he was kind of known for something else. Josiah was an actual medical doctor. Some of the people that said they were doctors did go to medical school, but he did. He was from Chicago. He helped design the Chicago City Seal and worked for Rush Medical there. And he started traveling around to small areas. And going back a couple of hundred years, at the turn of 1800s, there was a lot of Native Americans still in the area, and one of them was Big Thunder. If somebody was from Belvedere, so you probably have heard of Big Thunder. He was the leader of the Potawatomi tribe that was around this area, and he was buried. Before he was buried, he got sick, and he told his tribe that he felt like there was some danger coming, and he wanted to help his tribe. So he told them, I want you to sit me up on a bench and put my weapons in my hand, because I will rise and help you defeat your foe when they come. Unfortunately for Big Thunder, they put him up there about where Belvedere's courthouse is now, and it was right on a stagecoach trail. And when they were getting the horses changed and all that, people would wander, and before long, people would start to walk up and take a look at what was behind this fencing that his tribe had put him behind. And they were curious about it, and the Indians would come, and as they were traveling through the area, they would put tobacco there. So they decided to start taking the tobacco at first as a souvenir, and after the tobacco was gone, then they took his weapons. And after his weapons were gone, they took his bones. And the tribes were coming through still and leaving things, and they were horrified to see less and less of their chief, Big Thunder. So they put a curse on anybody who took any of the bones. And unfortunately for Josiah, who happened to be going through the area, he took Big Thunder's skull. So people were like, you aren't worried about the curse? And he said, no, I don't believe in that kind of stuff. I'm a medical doctor. Well, he might not have believed it. But one night, on Christmas night, when he was helping a patient in the area, he was walking back home, and ended up falling in a well and breaking his neck. And after that, people always said that he was a victim of the curse of Big Thunder, and that's what he got known best for. Not anything he did with his life, just that he died of this horrible curse. So his family, stayed here and put his grave here. And the other thing that he's known for is he actually named this cemetery. He named it Cedar Woods at first, but Cedar Bluff, and then at that time there was not these big trees, and you could see all the way to the downtown of the city that he helped name. So when I first started telling ghost stories, I asked people what ghost stories this place had, and this is the one that people told me the most. This is a story of Carrie Spafford. Her family was another founding family in Rockford. Her father was a banker. He owned a great big mansion over off of Cedar Street and Chestnut Street. And so he was a banker, and the mother worked at home, and they had a couple of beautiful daughters. One was Eugenia, and one was Carrie Spafford. And Carrie was about 16 years old when she met a very dashing, handsome young man named Elmer Ellsworth. Has anybody heard of him before? Okay. Elmer, he was very much into military history, and he was part of a militant group that would just basically travel from city to city, put marches on, dress nice, and pick up the girls. So because Spafford's house was the center of the social activity in Rockford, he ended up with meeting Carrie. And he was smitten. She was quite beautiful. And and available. And so they fell in love, and he wrote back and forth, and I read some of the letters, and the only thing is that her father was not impressed with this man, that really had no way to support his daughter. So he said, this is not going to take place, this wedding, because they were starting to talk marriage. And he said, not until you get a job where you can take care of my daughter. So Elmer, being, really smitten by this girl, said, okay. And he went down to Springfield to become a lawyer. And he ended up meeting Abraham Lincoln. And he got really close with Lincoln, and in fact with the whole family. And when Lincoln was elected president, he went to Washington because they knew there was going to be a war, because everybody was upset that Lincoln made it as president. So they knew there was going to be a war. And as his friend, one day Lincoln was looking out, and he could see Alexandria across the Potomac, and there was a Confederate flag hanging in a bar, an inn there. And he asked Elmer, he said, would you guys get your guys and march over there and take down that flag? And he said, sure. So they did. They marched over there. Elmer marched up the stairs, took down the flag, and on the way down, the barkeep shot him. So Elmer Ellsworth was the first officer to be killed in the war, and everybody mourned this man. People here mourned him. Everybody put the black stuff on their house, and Carrie was devastated. She was very much in love with this young man. And when I heard this story, it really touched me about Elmer. And I was thrilled when I went to Kenosha. They have a wonderful Civil War museum there, and they feature a whole thing on Carrie and Elmer's relationship. Now, the Lincolns invited Carrie to the ceremony. He was laid in state at the White House, and but she was too devastated to travel that far and didn't go. He was buried in New York, in his hometown there, and Lincoln was very sad by this whole thing. And I wondered when I did this story, I thought, well, did Carrie find love again? Did she have a happy ending? And she did. She met a man named Frederick Brett, and they were married, and they had a son named Charles. And they lived out east for a while, but then they came back. Her father was getting older, and she really loved her dad, so they moved back to be by him. But within a 16-month period, her father died, her husband died, and then her beloved son died. And Carrie was devastated again by all that loss. And she would make her way from the family mansion on Madison and Chestnut Street, and she would dress in her full Victorian gown and come and walk all the way here, and people would see her standing here crying over the graves of her family. And even after she passed away in 1911, people would still see her, and they said she would walk by, you wouldn't hear a sound, but it was cold. It was cold like just an icy blast when she passed you. And they would see her here and hear her cries going over the hills of this little cemetery. Carrie doesn't have a tombstone. Her family's back here, and I've contacted her family several times because I think Carrie should have a tombstone. She and her sister Eugenia gave their mansion, their family mansion, to the YWCA, and Carrie herself did a lot for the women in town. The other part of the Spaffords started the Rockford Women's Club, Jessie Spafford. So the Spafford family is known for giving so much to Rockford, but Carrie would hire a lot of these unwed mothers or women whose husband had died early, and they were trying to keep their families together, and she would help them. But I haven't been able to get permission from the family, and you can't just rock a tombstone, I guess. So I'm hoping Sunday. Last time we were here, last summer, it was kind of funny because Sarah was with me, and she said, I've got somebody that wants to talk to you. And I'm like, okay. And she said, Carrie wants you to come say hi. And I'm like, all right. So I got friends. Carrie and her sister Eugenia was back here. They like when I come and tell their story. And she said that they like when I come and talk to them. But I don't know why, and I don't know who. But a couple of years ago, after I started telling Carrie's story, somebody put a really creepy cat sculpture or the little statue back here, so y'all have to come look at this pretty statue back here. I don't know if Carrie likes cats and somebody's paying honor to her, or they just, it's just kind of a creepy looking little thing.
Is it attached by cement?
I don't know. It wasn't there for a while. So I don't know if somebody took it and something really horrible happened to them and they brought it back. I don't know. So I would hope so. So it seems like I always end up doing Cedar Bluff around this time, and the psychics that I've worked with over these years say that this cemetery is very, very active all the time, that around this time it's super active because a lot of the men that fought in the Civil War recognized Gettysburg for some reason, and it's like they all get riled up around this time of the year because Gettysburg was fought over the 3rd and 4th and 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of July, so they get riled up about it. So. Anyway, the other legend that I heard when I came here, and this one kind of threw me in, you know, I don't tell, I'm really kind of mean to the psychics because I don't tell them the stories before I bring them here the first time. And they usually walk away so they can get their readings and stuff. And so I'll tell the rest of that part. But over here we have one of the only mausoleums in this whole cemetery. It's in the side of the hill over here, and it is the Hamilton Mausoleum. It was built by H.H. Hamilton. He has one of the distinctions of being one of the first millionaires in Rockford. He made his money in transportation up in Duluth. He spent a lot of time up there, but he had a mansion here, and he had a young daughter named Barbara. He was married to Carolyn Shouty, another family that helped settle Rockford, and they were very happy, and they had, their daughter was very, was a prim and proper girl of Rockford for the time period in the late 1800s, early 1900s, when she was born. But she loved horses, and unfortunately, she had this really big horse that she loved, and unfortunately, one day she took a fall, and it ended up ripping part of her intestines, and she ended up with peritonitis. And basically, that's an infection of the stomach area because of a leakage. Her dad tried to get her, you know, back to health. He built a little area in their house for her so she could get the sunshine as much as possible. Took her to Chicago for months and tried to get her treated by the best doctors there. Took her up into Minnesota where there was a specialist. Nothing helped, and she just declined. And he was actually in Minnesota when Barbara got really, really sick, and he traveled home, and he just made it right before she passed away. And in fact, he didn't know if she really realized he was in the house when she died. They buried her here. He built the mausoleum and had it landscaped. It was over an $8,000 venture for that time in 1914. And the legend is that when the horse that she fell from passed away, he also had that buried here. And they had their mansion where they could see it. That's why it's at the angle it's at. It's kind of a straight angle of the hill. But their mansion sat on 2nd Street, and they could look out and see the mausoleum from their house. After Barbara passed away, unfortunately, H.H. and Carolyn ended up separating, and they are actually divorced, which was unusual for the time period. Carolyn made her name for herself doing artwork, and also she was a master gardener, so she would plan out the gardens in the mansions around here. She is laid to rest here with Barbara and Barbara's horse, but H.H. remarried in Duluth and is buried up there. So she's known as the Princess of Browns Hills because that's what this area was called.
In the 60s when we lived in Cedar Bluff.
tell you the part about the psychic. So I was standing here, and I said, "Are you getting anything?" And I'll be danged if the person looked at me, and that was when I was using, or I was partner with Mark Dorset way back, and he looks at me, and he's not from here, he was from Sycamore, and he says, "There's a horse," and he said, "There's a horse that comes and goes over here." Yeah. The story is that there's a horse buried there, so.
It looks the same as the movie.
Yeah. There's been a lot of vandalism, unfortunately, in this, but I'm really glad that is still. I think some of the plants that they put in there, it sounds like it's pretty distinctive work. And the paper, of course, went into great detail, the marble and stuff that's inside, and that's why I was really surprised that it wasn't. Even back in the day when this was actively used for a lot of the founding fathers. One of the men that was killed had a big arch over his grave, and somebody stole that right after there because it wrote about it in 1800s. About why would somebody do that? So, unfortunately, I think it's because it's kind of isolated. So, this is one of those stories that kind of freaked me out a little bit when it happened, because people ask me how I know the people that I choose to work with as psychics are psychic, and sometimes they throw things at me and I'm like, I don't know about that. But this particular story, like I said, I spend weeks and weeks and weeks doing the research for each of these tours, sometimes months, and I found this story is Alexander Foltz here, and he was a soldier. He was from Russia, and so he didn't even really speak very good English. He had married a girl. They lived on Greenwood, not too far from here. But he ended up going to France to fight in World War I. And he was part of the infantry unit, and there was a machine gun nest at the top of the hill that they had to take. And they had a special gun that was pretty much a suicide mission. If you carried this gun, everybody was going to try to shoot you. And as they were storming the hill, man after man fell. And finally, Alex grabbed the gun and he ran, and he was able to wound the men in the machine gun's nest and save the rest of his unit. As I told the story to the people, Sarah walked up behind me and she said, the boy that you're talking about was killed. And I said, well, yes, that's why we're talking about it. But she said, he said that his family didn't get the reward. And I said, well, he was given a medal and his wife got it. And she said, no, his family didn't get it. So I said, okay. And the tour ended, we moved on. She said, he wants you to know that he's not resting because his family didn't get the reward. Okay, tell him I'm sorry that, I know his medal was handed to the wife. But I researched the story even further and found out that the year after this happened, the governor from Illinois traveled to Russia, and to the area that Alexander was from was a very poor area. And his family, the governor was traveling with an interpreter, and the governor didn't know this woman who walked up. She was jabbering in Russian, and the interpreter said she has papers she wants you to interpret for her. And so then they looked at the paperwork, and it was a notification that her son Alexander Foltz had been killed, but he had a life insurance policy of $12,000, and he wanted it was supposed to come to her. Well, because of the way the country was at the time, the governor didn't want to just give her the money, arrange for the money. He had to go back and arrange for the government to get the money to her. But he was afraid that they would take it from her, the Russians would take it. So what he arranged was for them to come to America, and he went to escort them back. And when he went to get the family, they had all been killed. They had all died. Some of the children had died from starvation. So if that's what Alexander meant, that his family didn't get what he left them, I don't know. But that's that's something I didn't know when I first told the story, but her telling me his story and his part of it made me look deeper into that story of what happened. And then I found out, and you know, there was nothing to be done at that point because the family was gone. And the governor felt really, really bad. So he's buried here, and his wife is not next to him, so I don't know him. But I come and put a flag on his grave every morning. So, like we said about Greenwood, I am kind of sinking right there. That's kind of gross. Okay. So, with Greenwood, a lot of the major people who own mansions and stuff were buried there. This is pretty much the everyday man spot. And this particular story happened in 1911, and it's the story of Leo Carlson. Leo is buried here in an unmarked grave, but he is right here. Leo lived not too far from here with his lovely wife, and they had a really good relationship when they first started, but they had a baby, and the baby died, and it just kind of tore them apart. She was very, very young, and after the baby died, he was working as a carpenter, and he was putting in like 12 to 16-hour days trying to support the for her, and they had a big apartment, and she just was lonely, so she asked a couple of girlfriends to move in with them. And that's where it got really bad, because when he was at work, the three of the two girls and her would go out in the evenings, and the landlady was like, okay, they have to move out because it's causing some trouble here. You got these girls that are walking the street, and that's not acceptable in the early 1910, 1911. And so he kind of put his foot down and said, "You girls gotta go. You girls gotta go." And the wife got very, very upset, as you know, and she's like, "Well, then I'm just gonna leave." And she went up to Beloit, where her mom lived, and moved back in with her mom. And Leo was very depressed about this, and he was telling everybody about it. And he ended up writing a really long thing to put in the newspaper about how his wife deserted him, and he worked really hard for her, and she shouldn't have done that. And then he went up to the mom's house, knocked on the door really early one morning, and the mom let him in. And he went in, and his wife was still in bed. And he said, "Get up, we're gonna go out to breakfast." And she said, "No, I don't think so." And he said, "Well, just get up and talk to me then." So she was getting dressed, and she's putting her hair up. And as she was putting her hair up, he stepped up behind her, put a gun to the back of her head, and shot her. Then he ran out to the hallway, and the mother was screaming, because she heard the gunshot and she knew what had happened. And he said, "I should shoot you too." And then he ran into the room next to there, and he drank a vial of poison, and then he put the gun up to his head and shot himself. He wrote that he wanted this letter that he had written about his wife, calling her all these names and saying this horrible thing to her. He wanted it in the newspaper, and they printed it, every word of it. And I was kind of shocked by that they used his words to make the victim of this crime like she deserved to be shot.
Was he punished?
He died. So he shot himself.
Oh, duh. The poison and the gunshot.
Yeah, it's like he didn't want to suffer the poison effects, but thought, well, I'm going to drink this because then I'm not going to turn back. So yeah, but he's still being punished because apparently, according to he haunts this cemetery because apparently the girl haunts the cemetery too. They're both here, and she's really pissed at him, and he's really still pissed at her, and they're still kind of going on. Yeah, that's why I don't know why she wouldn't just move on, but she's here and he's here, and people say that it doesn't feel very good right down in here. That it feels like you walked into an argument sometimes. I don't know about that, but I'm like, why would you choose to?
And what was his name?
Leo Carlson.
Is she buried here too?
No. she's up in
just
not,
her
yeah,
spirit
but
is
she's here. Yeah. And that's what Sarah said, there's a woman here. I'm like, well, because she didn't know the story. And she said the woman is really mad about something this guy did to her. And I'm like, why would you do that? I mean, I would be on the beach eating it. But I was really, really shocked. You know, this was early 1900s when women were still thought of as, you know, property pretty much. So.
Is there a reason why he doesn't have a headstone then? Is it because of the
because
crime or no
everybody
money?
knew what he had done, and you know, his family wasn't from here. So I think that the only one who would have put the tombstone would have been her family, and they didn't do that. So yeah, perhaps not. Perhaps not. And you know, sometimes when there were murders, there are several murderers over, especially that area over there was Potter's Field, and so there's like single graves over there too. And he had enough money left that he could afford a nice cemetery, or you know, some cemetery burial, but he couldn't put away the yeah, all of the murderers that are in here are don't have tombstones.
Murderers? There's a whole section of them?
No, they're just scattered.
Oh.
Yeah, there's several of them, but they're not all in a section. They don't. It's like got Murderers Row.
Group them all together.
Yeah, no, they have a baby section down in the newer part, but yeah, it's Greenwood is very disturbing because they have the babies toward the front of the, like where Auburn is. So if you start by where St. Mary's Cemetery is, that corner there, that part of it's a Catholic cemetery, and you know there's a fence. If you start from there and walk toward the entrance, it's decade after decade after decade of babies. So it's really sad there. So I have been researching this cemetery for many years, but I relied on the local history room downtown. It's not what it was before the move, but hopefully they'll get it back again. But the lady that I call her the guru of all things history of Rockford, is Jean Lithgow. She has been employed at the Rockford Public Library for 53 years this year.
I love her.
Yeah, she's great.
She's a sweetie.
So she taught me how to find the cemetery records and stuff. And so when I find a story that she has not heard of, I go running in there, and she's like, okay, wait, is this a bad one? And now she doesn't even have to ask. She just knows it's going to be bad. But I have found some that I can tell that are just, you know, fun stories, or, you know, very inspirational stories. So this story, I was really surprised that she did not hear. We're going to talk about Mildred here. Mildred, as you can tell, was about 20 years old. Her family and her lived here, and she worked for the Buckbee Seed Company for a while. And she was in the greenhouse, and she got a piece of dirt in her eye, which caused an infection, and she almost lost her eyesight. So her mother and her father asked her to quit that job and to get another job. So at that time, there was an up-and-coming, you know, we were very industrial and manufacturing. And there was an up-and-coming company called the Sutton Top Shop. And the Sutton Top Shop, it's hard to say, they made film window shields for cars and for golf carts. And they were this kind of a film stuff. And they were expanding. They were going from one shift, and they hadn't hired a woman ever, to 3 shifts, and they realized that they were going to have to, if they're going to expand, they're going to have to let women come there. So they were located on Elm Street downtown, and when you walked in the building, they had these saws that would cut these huge pieces of this material, and then they would take it up to the girls upstairs, or the men, or whoever was working that shift, and they would sew it on a piece of canvas, and then that would have been stretched over the top of the car to create the hood, and then like the windshield. So they were going to be moving into a new building. They were expanding to 3 shifts so that they could get even more stuff out. And it was very, very exciting time for the company. So Mildred went there, and she got a job, and she was really excited. She was going to work the second shift, 3 to 11 shift, and so she got hired one day. The next day she went back, and 3 more girls had been hired that day, right off the street. So she was excited because they were all gonna, be friends and work in this place together. So that day, they were just getting used to the building. They were being walked around and shown the sewing machines, and some of the women haven't even filled out their paperwork at this point. And part of the day's ritual was they had these young boys that would go around and they would collect the pieces of that leftover film that would fall on the ground. Unfortunately, that film was created, it was a petroleum-based chemical covered stuff. So they would have to pick it up because when it was being cut, sometimes sparks would fly off of the saw. One pile had gotten pretty high, and unfortunately it happened to be right under where the stair to the second floor was. And within a minute, the whole building was completely engulfed in black smoke and flames. And witnesses, survivors, actually said they had maybe 30 seconds to figure out how to get out of the building, and they turned and the staircase was all in flames. So the only way they could think to get out was the windows. So some of them actually jumped out of the window onto the ground, and by this time people were running to help and there was screaming going on, and one girl was completely engulfed in flames. She jumped out of a window, landed in a car, which set the car on fire. They had all these people that were helping the girls and taking them to the hospital, so nobody knew where the women were and if they had survived. So their families started coming so the street was completely packed of people. And the fire burned so quickly and so hot. One of the ladies named Miss Lillian Finkbeiner, who was kind of like the supervisor for the women, had laid a piece of plywood down, or like a 2x4 kind of thing, over to the neighboring building, and got like 12 of the women out through that way. And she was called a hero for that. She saved quite a few people's lives. The men were trying to get up the stairs, but the flames were too bad. The 2 men that owned it were brothers, Suttons, and one of them was a ward alderman for that area. And they were trying to get back in to figure out some way to get to the women, and they actually had to be restrained by the fire department because they were, it was too dangerous to go. So when
That
it was
started
all,
OSHA.
Pardon?
Right. That started OSHA and safety.
It actually did, yes. They, were basically taken to court by quite a few of their family members. So by the time it was all said and done, and it cooled off enough that the coroner could go inside, he went himself instead of sending his aides who would normally get the bodies and bring them back to his place, because the bodies were so badly burned that there wasn't a lot left. So he packaged them up himself, and then they said there must have been probably 800 people in the street, and you could have heard a pin drop because of just the quietness as they waited. His families waited to find out if their wives, mothers, daughters were inside. They followed the wagon all the way to the coroner's office, and then they, some of the families discovered that their wives had already gone home, or some of them were in the hospital at that time. Other ones waited and realized that 5 women were killed inside the building, and they figured they just died right where they were at. They found them all together in the building, and it took Mildred's father, him and his brother, walked and looked at the bodies for over an hour before they finally decided which one was Mildred. And I think it was mainly because the other ones were starting to get identified because of jewelry that they wore. So they brought Mildred home to be buried. Her father did end up suing the company, and they got $1,500. Other women that died in that fire. One was a mother of 8 children, and they were all left orphans. And they were farmed out to different relatives, but they couldn't be kept together, so they were all ended up with different people. Another one was a girl that just happened to be, she was just visiting from Kansas City, and this job opportunity opened up, so she just walked in and got the job and ended up dying right there. So it was just a horrible story. Unfortunately, Mildred isn't here so much, but her father never got over the fact that he told his daughter to quit the job and get this new job, and because of the safety issues, and he does not rest. He's here now. The first time I told this story, the psychics freaked me out a little bit because they kept smelling smoke, and they didn't know what I was going to talk about next. So when I brought him here and told him this story, they're like, But it's mainly the father that haunts this particular area because of her. One of the girls was in the hospital for 6 weeks, but she did recover. They made a big deal about that she was the only one that was that badly damaged that survived.
Did the company go bankrupt?
No, they opened a new shop, started making more things, and they made visors too for people to wear. So they did really well, and they compensated the families as best they could. There's no monument or mark or anything. I usually tell the story downtown when we're doing the walking tour, right about where Lincoln's bust is on I think it's Church Street. That's about where the shop was. So Dan, I'm going to tell this story just for you.
Oh, right.
This one has a twofold story. This is Grant Damon over here. Now, when I told this story the first time, it was upsetting enough because he wasn't very old, and he died during World War I. He was sent to France, and when I told the story, Sarah didn't even let me. She came walking right up to me, and she's just like, "All right, this guy's talking to me already, and I've got to tell you his stories." Okay. So he was in the fields in France, and during World War I is when they really started to use chemicals and the mustard gas. The Germans were dropping mustard gas. And mustard gas was really bad because it could lay on the fields, and then when the soldiers would walk on it, they would stir it back up. And they would breathe it in, and it would basically eat away the nose and the lungs, and sometimes they died right away, sometimes it took weeks. So Grant here was over there, and he was safe. He was off the field, but he turned around and he saw his friend had been hit. So he ran back on the field, took his mask off and put it on his friend and carried him off the field. Grant lingered for a month until he finally passed away. Now the reason I said about Dan, you have investigated Memorial Hall.
Yes.
Okay. Well, one of the stories of Memorial Hall is that there is a bench, and sadness follows that bench wherever they move it. If you sit there, you get just a really heavy feeling on it. And the story goes that, from what the psychics have all said, is that a mother who was expecting to get her son's transportation information, he was going to come home for Christmas, and she went to get it, and instead she got a horrible piece of paper saying that your son has been killed. So we were here telling the story of Grant. They didn't know, Paul and Sarah didn't know that I was going to be talking about it. They didn't know any of the details, and all of a sudden Sarah and Paul both said, "You know her." And I said, "How do I know Della? It's Della here." I said, "I don't know Della. She died in the 40s. I'm not that old. What are you talking about?" And they said, "Della is the woman at Memorial Hall that went to get her son's information and got his that." So they have been trying for years to talk to, because she haunts Memorial Hall and he haunts here because he's trying to meet, his mother's not where she's supposed to be. So it's odd that they can't connect them, but they talk to him, they talk to her, and he, even though he did give his life for his friend, he keeps insisting that he didn't finish what he set out to do there. So he's haunted by that, and he's haunted by the fact that his mother never recovered from his death. But so when you're in Memorial Hall, you could talk to Della, and I was there talking to Scott to arrange I'm doing a talk there on July 13th, and he said that there was a security guard that was in the basement, and he heard a woman's voice, and it was like from far away, but he said, she said the word Ella. She kept saying her name was Ella. And I said, well, could it have been Ella instead of Ella? And he said, maybe. And so the guy wrote me, what had happened. And I told him, thank you for sharing your story. And I'm pretty sure, Della's still there. Trying to get the name out there. Word out.
Yeah, because we've done some stuff there, and Sandy said there's definitely a woman wandering around there like she's looking for something.
She's looking for her son, who's here, looking for her. So, I guess, if you do this business long enough and you hear these stories long enough, and you work with psychics who can actually talk to the dead folk, one thing you realize is, number one, people don't have this great, when they pass over, they don't become better people. They're pretty much what they were here. So if they were not nice here, they're not nice after. And if they're troubled or they don't feel like they completed something here, they still have a reason to go on. And if your house is haunted by somebody, I can talk from personal experience, you may be able to maybe dampen it a little bit, but until they get their story out, I don't know that they ever really go away. So we can stay on the road for this one so you don't have to get spooky. As the person who does the historical research in the cemetery, it drives me crazy when they get things wrong. So there is a wonderful plaque here by Samuel Church's grave that really belongs to his dad. Samuel, it's a thing for the War of 1812, and Samuel wasn't born before the War of 1812. So I want to pull it out and move it over, but I just can't do it. Anyway, so Lazarus was his name, Lazarus. Church. He fought in the War of 1812, so he is recognized for his service. His family has served Rockford in many, many ways, usually in law. He has a son, Selden Church, who was a judge from this area, and then he has Samuel Church, and his wife's name was Silence. So I guess she was a good wife. I'm not sure what that was all about, but if you read Bill Gorman, who wrote the first Ghost Book of Rockford, he talks about Silence. They didn't have children apparently, and a little boy was playing in the cemetery and he saw Silence here. So, but I don't know. That one wasn't written up in the paper. But I do have a story about Samuel. Samuel was a sheriff here in town, and he has the wonderful distinction of being the man who was the incoming sheriff for the first public execution that we had here in Winnebago County. In the fall, in November of 1856, the outgoing sheriff at that time was John Taylor, and he was married and had a little son, and he kissed his wife goodbye one day and went off to work, and shortly after he got into the office, they came and told him that there were two brothers that they suspected of being horse thieves, and they were cattle thieves, and they were there. They had brought in a herd of cattle, but they were trying to sell it for a really low price, so they suspected that they stole them. So John Taylor went to talk to them at the time, and they were kind of not really answering his questions very well, so he arrested him. Alfred and his brother were arrested, and they were walking them toward the jail at the time. They had checked, patted him down. They found some bullets, but they didn't find any weapons. As they neared the jail, Alfred Countryman pulled away from John Taylor and took off running. So John went after him, and he caught him, and then Alfred pulled a gun and shot him, and he fell. And then Alfred ran for his life, and because of the shots and the screams of people seeing this happen, There were over 100 people that chased him down, and they thought they were going to lynch him right there. People were very outraged at this, and what happened was Samuel Church stepped forward and said, please, let's cool your thoughts and cool your hearts and your heads, and let's just calm down and let the law take its course. And he calmed everybody down, and he arrested Alfred. Alfred was put on trial, found guilty of the murder of John Taylor, and an execution was scheduled. There were many times during all this period that bands of men would show up and try to pull him out and lynch him right there in the spot, and Samuel was able to cool their heads every time. But he was worried about Alfred being lynched, excuse me, and so he decided that he would have him escorted to where they were going to have the hanging. Now, Samuel owned a farm out of the outskirts of Rockford, which now would be along School Street where St. Patrick's Church is at. He had a farm out there. So they decided they would have the hanging there. And for some reason, word got out. It was just better than Facebook in the day. Over 8,000 people came to watch this hanging. Children, people were bringing picnics. They had special trains bringing people from Iowa, Wisconsin, Chicago. And Alfred was scared, and they put him in the stagecoach, and the sheriff's department refused to escort the carriage because he had shot the sheriff. So they had the firemen escort this carriage because I guess they were worried that he would be killed before they killed him. But anyway, they escorted him all the way out there, and he got up, and his family was in the crowd. Alfred Countryman's family was in the crowd, and they said 8,000 people, and you could have heard a pin drop when Alfred Countryman, they put him up there and put the noose around his neck, and he said, wait, and he apologized. He said, I am so sorry, I did what I did, and pray for me. And then they put the hood over him, and they dropped him, and the only thing you could hear was the sobs of his family members. After it was over, Samuel Church gave a wonderful speech and said that he thanked everyone for being so calm and following rules and being good citizens. And then he said that he hoped that the sword of justice would never be unsheathed to such brutality again. Unfortunately, there were 3 more hangings in Winnebago County before that stopped. The last one was in 1910. They did learn from that. After that, they built a stockade around where they hung people downtown, and they issued tickets. About 200 people got to go watch it, and they had over 1,000 people that tried to get the tickets, and then they would wait outside themselves. So Samuel served us in that capacity. He went on to serve as sheriff after John Taylor. And you can see that their babies didn't survive. They had babies, but they didn't survive.
That does say babies. I was trying to get them.
So sometimes when I find these little things about history, it kind of freaks you out that all this history happened right here in Rockford. And this is definitely one of those stories. This story, again, they were people that moved here from somewhere else, just like most of the other people of Rockford. But the one son of Dr. Alden Thomas was named Henry Martin Thomas. And he served in the Civil War, Henry did. And he was young, and he was home in 1863, he came home for a visit, and then he got on a ship in St. Louis and was going to go down on the steamboat down to New Orleans where they were fighting. Now, in 1863, the Mississippi had just been opened up after Vicksburg. That was fought at the same time that Gettysburg was fought. And basically, the South owned Mississippi before that, from 1861 to 1863, the North really didn't have much going on going up and down the river. So it was a great thing to be able to do that. Unfortunately, what happened, the Southern Confederates decided that they would go on some of these steamboats now that were traveling up and down the river, and they would sabotage them. So on this particular boat in September of 1863, Henry was riding back. He had been home for a wonderful visit with his family. At 6 o'clock in the morning, somebody yelled fire. And he went out and he made it off the steamship, but he went back to help get other women off. There were about 200 people on the boat, and over 50 of them were killed in the fire. And they found the man that did it. They couldn't prove that he did it, so they had to let him go. But he was also, he was later convicted of burning other ships, including the Sultana, where over 2,000 people were killed on that one. But Henry was one of the only men that were killed in this particular one, and he went back to save women and children. Quite a few of the children didn't make it off the ship, so that was unfortunate. But he gave his life for helping that, and I didn't, I thought, well, gosh, that's awful brutal, but when you think about the war, and it was war, so what they did, I guess I didn't realize they were doing stuff with the women and children until I did this story. So they didn't care. It was just damaging, and it would put fear in. It was like a psychological warfare, and it was sort of the same thing that Grant and he would do, and then Sherman when he burned his path to the sea. They devastated farm after farm after farm, the North did, to make and break the will of the Confederates, and so this was started earlier than that. So it was unfortunate, but I like to tell the veterans' stories as much as I can as I find them. So, all right. So
He married twice.
yeah.
So it says his wife and the daughter and then his wife.
Yes, he was married twice, but he probably, he probably married. There's one down there that the wife, it looked like she'd been dead for like a month, and he married the next one. I'm like, wow, she wasn't even really cool yet.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
it's just I've never seen it where they got remarried and it had both wives on
Yeah,
there.
and what I find, I always wonder, like, how do they figure where they're gonna go,
Yeah.
And there's one in Winnebago that's kind of funny because the first wife is buried right next to the husband, and the second wife is like behind, like in the second row. That's what we did. Yeah.